Bayhackle Sports presents the Delano Little Show.
Welcome to Bayhackle Sports, the Delano Little Show. We are here today with Winston Kelley, the Executive Director of the NASCAR Hall of Fame, and you've always been so gracious to me. It is good to have you here on the show.
Well, and vice versa. It is so good to see you. When I got this call, it's like, man, I cannot wait to sit down and have this conversation. Miss seeing you on WBTV, but it's even better to see you here in person.
Well, you know, there's something that ties us in for all time together. I don't know if you remember this. I'm going to go back in time just a little bit. When I first arrived here back in 1989 here in Charlotte, started my television career, people said you need to go out and learn how to play golf, and you'll start to meet people that can give you tips about what's going on in the sports world. So I did, and I met a guy, and he was larger than life. He was a huge race fan, and we called him Big Bob. And Big Bob would call me up, and he got to know me, and we were very good friends. And he called me with a race scoop, and he said, Delano, let me tell you, it's Big Bob. I got a story for you. And he'd give it to me, and I was like, it's a story I might go with. So I would go with it, and the more we got it right, I got 4 right in a row. And then he called me, and the last time before he passed away, he called me and he says, Delano, I got another story for you. This is a big one. Now, this is a big one. You may not know this person's name that much yet, but it's a big story. And he said, Winston Kelley is his name, is going to be the executive director of the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And I said, really? And I went with it. And do you remember that? Do you remember that?
I do remember that because the next morning I was supposed to have a meeting with my staff at Duke Energy to tell them that I was leaving. When I saw your story, and it's like, I'm serious. I hope they don't see this story. And it's like, I wonder who leaked this thing. So now that I know, I've never known who leaked it. And fortunately, the staff and the staff I had at that time was all over the Duke Power Service territory, North and South Carolina. And had not even had a chance to tell my mom and dad because I was trying to keep it quiet.
Now I feel like I should get up and leave
so
here.
You definitely got to scoop.
Well, I didn't know that people even cared about that stuff, but yeah. I'm glad I could be linked to you as far as what you've done in your career. We've talked before, and we've been friends for a long time, but you always seem to be welcoming to a lot of people, and I can't think of a more perfect person to be welcoming everybody that comes here to the NASCAR Hall of Fame. It seemed like the job was perfect for you. How did that all come about?
You're very kind. I guess it's kind of the convergence of 2 careers. I had a 27-year career that I was still enjoying very much and not looking to leave at Duke Power that then became Duke Energy in a variety of managerial and executive roles. And then I'd spent about 30 years at that time when I came here working in the NASCAR industry for Motor Racing Network at that time, 20 years. When I was asked to apply for this job. And it's a little bit easier to interview for a job if you've got one you like. So the racing knowledge and the relationships that I had, coupled with having some business background and learning from some great people at both Duke Power, Duke Energy, and at Motor Racing Network, and the people I met there, just kind of made it the perfect time. And as much as I loved what I did at Duke, I just knew I would look back and regret it since I had grown up around the sport and had become friends with my childhood heroes. So then I was going to get to help honor them. So it just kind of came together at the right time in 2006.
And you knew what you were going to be inheriting as far as the NASCAR Hall of Fame. How did that make you feel? Was that a dream come true? Was it something that you would call a dream come true? Never
even thought about it, to be honest. My dream was, since I couldn't make a living in NASCAR, from a media standpoint, because when I got involved in radio, it wasn't a full-time job. And I was far enough along in my Duke Power career that I didn't want to leave it. So I did it, and it became my golf game. Even while the Hall was being considered and recruited to Charlotte, and I was a very small part of the team, and I would emphasize a very small part of the team, never crossed my mind that if it came here, I might work there. And then sometime late in the process, it came up, and a couple of people, one from NASCAR, one from in the Charlotte area, asked if I'd be interested in being considered for the job. And I said, well, I'll talk to them. But, Duke had just gone through a merger with Synergy. I had gotten another new role, working for Ellen Ruff, who I'd been working for, I think, the world of. And I thought, well, yeah, I will consider it. I will talk about it. And so it never even dreamed about it during the recruiting process. It just was presented to me, and it's like, I can't not do this, if you will.
Right. All right. And 16 years later now, Where are you here at the NASCAR Hall of Fame, and how much have you seen that has changed? And this is what brings people to Charlotte. A lot of people to Charlotte to see this NASCAR Hall of Fame, and you know how important it is to the community. What do you feel about it? How do you feel?
Well, it's the most sought after attraction in the Charlotte region by far in terms of museums and things like that. And I go back and I look at what some of the original objectives from the folks at the city of Charlotte had. It was about economic impact. It was about being able to leverage and work with NASCAR, leverage that international name and bring people in here, being able to grow the hospitality industry, being able to grow this part of Charlotte and, you know, the expansion of the convention center. All of those, but for the NASCAR Hall of Fame, would not have happened. You know, the development that's where the Whole Foods are and down that road, all that was done because the land was donated to the city from the state to be able to redo the intersection, sell that land, put that money toward the NASCAR Hall of Fame in the intersection, and it's achieved those goals. We've got over 60% of our guests come from more than 200 miles. The average travel distance is over 550 miles. The average travel distance. They stay an average of about 2 2/3 to 3 days with about 2 2/3 to 3 people, and a group spends an average of about $700 to $800. You do the math on that times the roughly 150,000 people that'll come in here on an annual basis. And I'm talking pre-pandemic, and we're definitely on the upswing. Right. There, we've met those economic development goals that we set out to. We've met the goals of being able to advance and be a part of advancing the hospitality industry, the growth of the convention center, all those things. We've been able to check those boxes. And then we also look at things like the education program we always envisioned building that, you know, over the last 6-7 years, we were up to 18,000 kids a year that are coming here, starting up a Hall of Fame foundation so we can subsidize schools for those who are economically challenged and things like that, and become embraced in the NASCAR industry. So are we finished? No, never will be. But I think we've made tremendous progress in those areas within the NASCAR industry, within the Charlotte community, and also the original intent was about economic development and been able to achieve that in large part because we're part of the bigger CRVA and hospitality industry, not because of just the Hall of Fame itself.
Now, for people and kids that may be listening to this on BayHackleSports.com, why come to the NASCAR Hall of Fame? What can they expect when they come here? Is it a lot of fun? A lot of interactive things to do?
Absolutely. And it depends on who it is and what they're looking for. And the thing that we like to say, and I think we have accomplished that, and we can tell in our customer feedbacks, we get a lot of surveys back, and we're averaging in the way upper quartile on our customer experience scores. We're averaging over 80%, and folks might think, well, 80, that's a B minus. No, 70 above and above is excellent. The metric we use can be from minus 100 to plus 100. Costco, Amazon, they rate in the high 60s, low 70s, and we're in the low 80s. So we feel like we've got a great program, and that's from diehard race fans or people like me that grew up around the sport or love the sport, or people that have never been here before. So if you are a school group, you're going to get an education that's tied to NASCAR, mostly STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. But we've also got reading in there. We've got arts in there. But you're going to have fun doing it. So there's a tremendous amount, over 50 interactives here. But if you're looking for that more pure museum educational part, we've got that as well. So a little or a lot of each.
Have you seen many NASCAR drivers come through here and walk the premises with them? And do they get a kick out of this?
Absolutely. We have a lot of announcements that are here, but it's not unusual for somebody to say, hey, did you know Joey Logano's here today? And he bought a ticket.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's not unusual. Or Rick Hendrick's here today. And, so I remember talking to Mr. H a couple of weeks after he had come here, because when they told me he was here and I couldn't find him, I said, well, appreciate you coming, but, we would have set you up tickets. He said, I can be a customer. I said, look around this building. yours and Richard Petty's, we probably got more of your stuff. So it's not unusual that that'll happen, that drivers will be here for different things. They come to support us in activities, but we've also had them and others within the industry, whether they're people that have been around it a long time or newer in the industry and looking to learn something about it.
Wow, and it sounds like Rick Hendrick, knowing him, very humble as you are, but you had a great MRN career on the radio, and I want to talk about that coming up here in just a few minutes. So Bay Hackle Sports, the Delano Little Show, will be right back. Welcome back to the Bay Hackle Sports Delano Little Show. It's good to have you here. We're talking to Executive Director of the NASCAR Hall of Fame, Winston Kelley. And, I talk about humility, and every time I talk to you, you hear other drivers talk about people, and you hear drivers talk about who their favorite race car announcer is. Many of them mention you, and I'm sure you've heard that before because you had a long career on the radio, Motor Racing Network. I mean, it's fantastic that what you did. How did you feel about your career? How did it all start?
Well, I think I get mentioned, and it's like Lee Petty used to say, I'd rather be lucky than good. And the name Winston helped me connect with people, even though I was not named after the Winston brand.
Right.
So I think that helped, and being around a long time helped as well. But getting to work on pit road and getting to interview the drivers before, during, and after the race and showing them the respect they deserve. Some of our guys in the turn don't get that same one-on-one, whether it's with drivers or crew members. And that's the thing I enjoyed. But how it started, very long story short, the first race I ever went to, I'm looking at that car now, the 1964 Daytona 500 that Richard Petty won. My father was the first public relations director at the Charlotte Motor Speedway. And as a part of that, he had promoted races. He had done PA. He was actually a sports editor at one time, at the Concord Tribune. So he had done a lot of journalistic work. So when he went to do PA for a couple of weeks at Daytona back in '64, Mom and Dad took us out of school, my older brother and I, and we got to go down for the week, do our schoolwork at the hotel, and go to the racetrack, see the qualifying races and the Saturday race and the Daytona 500. And I was hooked. Dad left the Speedway a little bit later on that year after the Coke 600, which was the World 600 that year. And he and Mom bought an auto parts store and went into business for themselves. And he went to work for the Universal Racing Network on the weekend and did, maybe a dozen or so races a year. Your dad hunts and fishes, you tend to hunt and fish. Dad was in a position that we could tag along with him to a place like Rockingham or Atlanta. We couldn't go to Trenton, New Jersey when he went there, but the drive-in races. So I tagged along with him as much as I could there and just loved the sport, loved the people and everything about it. But when I got out of college, you couldn't make a living at it from a journalistic standpoint. Not even TV wasn't even full-time back in the late 70s. So early 80s, 81 to be exact, I reached out to the guy he used to work for with Universal Racing Network and say, hey, can I help you? Hank Schofield said, yeah, I need a statistician. Do 10 races a year, pays $50 a race, and a hotel room if you need it. That's it. So I'm driving to Atlanta getting $50 a race. I'm driving to Richmond getting $50 for the weekend or Rockingham and loving it, trying to get my foot in the door. That led to being able to do PA at North Wilkesboro. And then I basically started pestering MRN and was a gopher with them for about a year and a half, just kind of tagging along, running information, pulling cable, setting up equipment, et cetera.
You put in your dues, didn't you?
Yeah. I spent 7.5 years from URN to MRN before I ever got on the air.
Wow.
And, when folks say, how do I get a job with MRN? And I say, you start at the local track, because I'd done high school football to get announcing experience, and then got to do North Wilkesboro, and then that led to doing some PA at Bristol and other places. So I had a little bit of experience there, and I think after almost 2 years, I think they figured out we either need to give him a microphone or run him off. But I wanted to do it that bad and to be a part of it. I was fortunate that I had a really great full-time job with Duke Power that I could go on the weekends to the drive markets, the Richmonds, the Atlantas, and places like that. And so toward the end of 1988, I got my first opportunity to be on the air, and was with them until the end of 2020. And told them I would help fill in. And there was not a need last year, but they've asked me about doing a few races this year, as their staffing has changed and the schedule being like it is. So, I'll probably do 2 or 3 races with them this year, which would be a gracious plenty.
Gotcha. Good. Now, do you miss the day-to-day grind of it? I mean, people ask me that all the time, and I'll say, not really. I don't, but do you miss it?
Well, when we were talking before we got started, I miss the same thing you do. I miss the people. And I'm fortunate in the job that I'm in now, even during the pandemic and the post-pandemic last year, I went to about 10 or 11 races a year. So I still got to see some of them. It was a little bit different than the interaction, with strategy and the crew chiefs on pit road. So I don't miss the day-to-day grind. It's harder to travel now than it was even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Forget the pandemic. Some of the races start later, but it's just harder to travel commercially. We've done plenty of charter flights and all, just longer days. I'm older, and I'm in early on Monday morning, mostly by choice. So
seems like it's a younger person's game these days. I mean,
running up down pit road, I have zero complaints, would not change a thing. But, it just got to the point that I wanted to be here more, and I'd cut back a little bit over time. Wanted to be here, leaving less on Friday afternoon and getting back late Sunday night, be here some more Saturdays and Sundays, and do a few more personal things, but still fill in where I can. But yeah, I miss the people greatly, and came along at a great time and worked with some incredible people at MRN.
Well, you've got so much work going on here, still at the NASCAR Hall of Fame, but what do you enjoy doing? How do you kind of relax, maybe a weekend away or whatever? What do you do?
What I like to do away, I like to go to the mountains in Blowing Rock. I got married last year, so my wife and they treat me just like I am a grandfather. We got a 4-year-old little girl and a 2-year-old little boy. And they've got me right there, and I am not ashamed of it. Not ashamed of it at all. So that's been a lot of fun doing stuff with them. Didn't get to ride my motorcycle much last year, but also enjoy riding a motorcycle, mostly, up and around the mountains. So I would say that's it. And then, a little bit of time to visit more with family and friends. I've got a dear cousin that's more like a sister that, I've been telling her for years, I'm going to come see you and your husband in Bath, North Carolina, which is way out in the coast, the first city in North Carolina. So got to see them, some college friends and stuff. So just doing what I guess normal people have been doing all these years.
Right. Do you ever go back to the high school and speak or do things at Concord? Do they call you and have you come in and do things like that?
I haven't recently. When we were building the hall, I went back to the Boys and Girls Club because I spent a lot of time there, and we actually just moved back to the northwest part of Concord because that's where the grandkids are, not because I grew up there. So I do hope to get back involved in the community as we come out of the pandemic, and the Boys and Girls Club would be one of those places that I'd like to do that.
Well, we appreciate you sitting down and talking to us, but we can't let you get out of here without telling us some of your favorite moments, because I would imagine being a pit reporter right there at the heat of the moment, you've heard a lot of great things and you've heard a lot of great quotes. Hopefully you can share some of them with us, okay? We're going to come back and talk more with Winston Kelley on the Delano Little Show. Stay with us. Welcome back to Bayhackle Sports, the Delano Little Show. We're joined by Winston Kelley, Executive Director of the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And 30 years, was it 30 years MRN? I was in television 29 years.
I think it's 34 years with MRN and then another 6 doing other things. So it was right at 40 years when I stepped away full time from MRN.
So you've seen a lot of things, right? Okay, if you got a best NASCAR driver, I guess, soundbite, who would that have been over the years that you could always count on them to give you something good and pit road after the race, whether they're mad or upset or whether they're happy?
Well, they're all different, and it's like saying, okay, who is your favorite coworker at WVTV? There's not that.
Mine was Angie Robbins, my producer now for here.
Of
So
course.
I would have to say that.
Yeah, if the king was standing here, it'd be him. If it was, one of the Wood brothers, it'd be them. They all have their different personalities. And one of the things I've always appreciated about our sport is they are incredibly accessible. And you experience that too. They see us as a conduit of information. And as long as you give them that space at the right time, they're going to work with you from, Richard Petty. And I use Richard as an example to our staff along with some others. That's who we need to emulate. I've got a picture on my desk of Richard giving me an autograph when I'm about 8 or 9 years old. And I found it while we were building the Hall of Fame. And it reminded me he did not treat me any different as an MRN reporter or going into this job as he treated that 8-year-old kid.
Wow.
And it's like, if the biggest name in the sport can do that, we can do that with everybody. And I made that pledge at groundbreaking, and our team has had incredible customer service results. So Richard, not just for what he did on the racetrack, but how he did it. I didn't interview him any in Victory Lane because he was winding down his career, but I did get to do his last interview as he got out of the car, his last race at Atlanta. So, that one was pretty special.
It's pretty cool because that's who kind of started you on it when you got
exactly.
the first time you saw it in '64.
And when you grow up and you get to, how many little boys and girls grow up and work with their childhood heroes?
Not many.
Probably not a lot. My childhood heroes were Richard Petty and Junior Johnson and the Wood brothers and David Pearson and people like that. They all became personal friends. I got to help induct Junior Johnson. I mean, that was the honor of a lifetime, getting to be personal friends and ridden motorcycles with Richard Petty and David Pearson and doing things with them. I love that. And, each one of them, you learn their personality. I've got to be friends with Terry Labonte. He did a charity motorcycle ride and a mutual friend invited me on it. And while Terry was not the most gregarious, he was always had such a dry wit. He and Bobby both. And we had some back and forth with his dad was not as laid back, and we would kid him about, if he or Bobby would give us some money, we wouldn't go ask Bob a question, his dad, if Bob was mad at it.
Yes.
So just that banner that you have back and forth with folks. So a couple of the more interesting ones that were unique that, so I'm interviewing Dale Earnhardt, who finished second at Bristol one year. And at that time, they brought him to the gas pump if you didn't win the race. And so I'm talking to him, and something kind of startled us. I felt something a little moist, and something bounced off of one of our shoulders. And Rusty's on the other side of the car hollering at him. And Dale had run into Rusty at like lap 50, spun him out. He never recovered from it. And Rusty had 450 laps to be mad. And he was mad. And he couldn't get his attention. So he threw a water bottle that bounced off of the top of the car and hit him. And, so they had a little discussion. There was no real pushing and shoving. And, Rusty was upset. They were good friends. And I kind of stuttered through that one. That was in the early to mid 90s. And that one was interesting. And there was another one with Tony Stewart. Tony, earlier in his career, was a little more animated.
Right.
And so I'm standing literally in Victory Lane, and his car is sitting in Victory Lane on jack stands. It's the second Daytona race, and I can't tell if he's ignoring me because the window net's down and the helmet's off, which a lot of times that means it's okay to talk to him.
Right.
They're working on the car, and after a couple of laps and the cars get on the back straightaway, I said, Tony, you want to talk? And he looked out, and he said in no uncertain terms, no, I don't want to talk. He looked ahead. Then he looks back and grins real big and said, it ain't personal. And, we laughed about it later. And he said, there was nothing I could say that I wasn't going to regret because we had run 3 restrictor plate races, Daytona, Talladega. He said, I hadn't run 15 laps. So, blew up at Daytona, got caught up in somebody else's accident the other 2 races. He said, if I finish 15th in those 3 races, I'm leading the points. He said, I just didn't want to say something. And, for him to have that presence of mind
right.
to do that. And another one with Tony, I had I don't do any wagering on NASCAR and never have, but I texted with a friend of mine who used to be Terry's pilot. And, he said, you want to bet a 6-pack of beer on the All-Star race. So I said, yeah, who you got? He said he'd take Jimmy. Okay, Jimmy's a pick at the All-Star race at Charlotte. And I said, okay, I'll take Smoke, Tony. So after I interviewed Tony on the grid and was starting to walk away, and I said, you really think you got a good car? He said, I think we got something for him. I said, good, I got a 6-pack bet on you, so I hope so. As I started to walk away, he said, if I win, I want my part. He won it. This is 2009.
Wow.
He won the race. First time with his Stewart Haas race team, and all those guys, most of them had never won a race. As I'm wrapping up my interview, he leans in and says, don't forget you owe me something. So I took him some beverages to Daytona.
Right.
Including PBR, which is his beverage of choice at that time before he became a Coke driver, and left it at his motorhome with a note, and he just mentioned it on the way up the grid. He won that race.
Wow.
And I asked him at the end of that interview, I said, if I'd have told you at the first of the year, your very first year as a car owner, that you'd win 2 races, because he had won 2 points-paying races and the All-Star, that you would have won 3 races by then, what would you have said? He grinned. He said, I'd have said, you've been drinking too much PBR. And it was his way. I mean, he's like an elephant, and it became our joke. So that's 2009. I don't remember it coming up again. He wins the championship in 2011, and I'm doing that interview, and as I'm wrapping up, he said, this one's going to cost you more than a 6-pack. Totally out of the blue. And then it became a joke when he was inducted into the hall. He looked around and said, where's our beer?
That's right.
So that kind, and there's others that I've had different relationships like that. But, people would see one side of Tony. But he remembered that, and it's not just with me, it's with other people. So things like that, and the friendships that you've made, and you can be objective as a broadcaster, but then have that relationship with them. And then there have been a number of crew chiefs that you could go to, and they tell you a lot more than, I won't say more than they should. They wouldn't say, we're going to do this, but here's things to look for.
Right.
Because they knew that we wouldn't throw them under the bus. And one of them, I won't use his name, but I thanked him as I was moving on for trusting us with sharing so much information, because there are many times that what he told me I could use, saying, here's what you might see in terms of pit strategy in these scenarios, and turn out to look smarter than I was because he trusted me. And he said, you trust people that are trustworthy. That meant a lot. But and that's what we tried to do, and the guys and gals at MRN. And there's so many like that trusted us to share the information at the right time. And I'm sure you were in that same situation multiple times. There are times you break a story. There's times when you comment on a story.
Yes. We're going to come back and talk with more with Winston Kelley on the Delano Little Show. Stay with us. Welcome back to Bay Aqua Sports, the Delano Little Show, here with the Executive Director of the NASCAR Hall of Fame, Winston Kelley. And we were talking about relationships that you develop with drivers. I was in television for 29 years. And I remember when I first got here, they told me to go down before a race. And they told me, I need you to go in the infield and talk to Mark Martin. And all the other guys that had been there and had done some things came to me and they says, be careful with Mark. He can yell at you if you don't ask the right question. So I was a little nervous, so I'm down in the infield, and Mark Martin's walking in front of me, and I've got my camera guy behind me, and we're running up there. So, Mr. Martin, can I get you real quick? And he turns around, and he stops, and he looks at me, and I says, and he had this mad look on his face, like he did not want to talk. And I said, just to let you know, I picked you in the office survey, the office pool. And he said, oh, did you? And he said, he just started talking. He was great. Sometimes you had to, finagle him a little bit to figure out how to get things. And the King, I would imagine, one of the big guys that you could always talk to, especially the person that you idolize more than anybody.
Yeah, he was always so open, whether it's an interview or not. And, I mentioned earlier that riding motorcycles is something I enjoy. And I actually one of the reasons I bought a motorcycle is I wanted to be able to ride to the track and go on Kyle's charity ride, Kyle Petty, his son's charity ride, and had done that for a few years. And one of the neatest experiences I ever had, it would have been around 2002, 2003 time frame. The ride was leaving from near Sonoma, where the race was out there, and going to somewhere in Colorado. I don't remember the exact en route. And I got to talking to one of Richard's folks about how are we going to ship our bikes out there. And I was working a TV show for Fox Sports Net at the time, NASCAR This Morning I did for 4 years. So I couldn't leave when the ride did. And Lance was saying, well, Richard's got an appearance and we're thinking about riding, and either catching up with the ride or meeting him at the end of that day. And so then Jim France, who was not chairman and CEO at the time,
right.
He was certainly involved in NASCAR and involved in IMSA and things like that. He was going to be out there and be on the ride as well. So here the four of us leave the Sonoma racetrack sometime later that morning. And, we're not going to ride hard to catch up to the ride, but we're going to take a little bit different route to cut off some time, and make our own fuel stops. So that was all going pretty well until, we left a place called Fallon, Nevada on Highway 50, and it's nicknamed the world's loneliest highway.
Right.
Didn't know that at the time. And I don't know how I ended up out front other than I was the only one with a CB radio on my motorcycle. So, we get about 10 miles out of Fallon and I realized there's nothing around here.
Right.
What, are we going to be able, I started doing the math from where we had stopped, and it's 110 miles from Fallon to Austin, Nevada, where the next stop was. Well, we had stopped like 40 or 50 miles earlier, maybe 60, and I knew my bike would make it all the way, but I wasn't so sure that Richard's bike would make it. I knew Mr. Francis was because I think he was on a BMW that got a lot of mileage. It's like, oh my goodness, if I run Richard Petty and Jim France out of gas out here, I don't need to come back. I just stay out here. So I saw a truck go by and I called them on the CB and said, is there any fuel between here and Austin? And they said, yeah, about 30 miles down the road, there's a little building on the side and it's got a gas pump. So I'm watching the speedometer. If we'd have got to 30, 32 miles, we were turning around and go back. I'd rather be embarrassed than out of gas. 26 miles, see this building on the side. We pull into a gravel parking lot. It had an above ground tank. Wasn't even high test that we normally use. And put some gas in the car. So when we went in, I went to pay for the gas and get some water. And Lance Brown, who works for him, was also getting some water. And he observed the first part of this and said there were two guys playing pool there and a lady watching, and it said, saw Richard go by. We didn't have anything racing related on. We had leathers and nothing that, he didn't have his cowboy hat or anything. And he said, the guy said, I'll be a son of a gun. That's Richard Petty. The other guy said, have you lost your mind? Do you know where we are? And Lance said they got to arguing about it. And the lady said, well, it did kind of look like him. So they turned around, and this is when I saw it. They looked at Lance. They didn't say anything. They said, yeah, that's the king. I told you. So they start going back and forth at each other. Richard hadn't seen any of that. So he comes out, and they stop him, get pictures and autographs. Then we go outside, and there's about 5 or 6 other people that how they got the word, that and they came to get pictures with him. And, Richard just laughed about it later and said, they just know me because of TV. I said, there ain't 5 guys in that garage area. And Lance and I went back by there because the route was near the next year because we didn't take pictures. That's the thing that we regretted. It was called Middlegate, Nevada. And on the side of that building, we went back and it was like a bar with a little restaurant, 12-room hotel, and a house beside it. And it said Middlegate, Nevada, population 18 with an X over it to 17. So what happened? The neighbor died. And they had pictures of Richard all up over there. But my point is, he gets recognized everywhere, treated them exactly like anybody else that he would. And for him to be recognized literally, and to this day, if he walked in here and said, tell me about Nowhere, Nevada, he'd know exactly what you're talking about. And that's 20 years ago.
Wow. Well, Concord, North Carolina, that's where you grew up. High school, I know you followed in your father's footsteps. But did you have a high school kind of field, or were you at the racetrack all the time? How did you grow up?
Well, if your dad hunts and fishes, you tend to hunt and fish. And I'm actually looking at the car that was the first race I went to in 1964, the Daytona 500 at Richard Petty won.
Got you.
So Dad was the first public relations director at the Charlotte Motor Speedway. And as a part of that, he would do some public address announcing work at different tracks. As he was putting up posters, that's how they communicated, come to the race, if we'd go to Martinsville or go to places like that. Well, Mom and Dad took my older brother Cliff and I out of school for the 64 Daytona 500 for a week. So we got to see the qualifying race and other races that were down there, did our schoolwork at the hotel. And from the first race I went to, I just loved it,
Wow.
and you get to meet the winner, and it's Richard Petty after the race, because Dad's interviewing him, that's a bonus as well. And then when he went into business for himself, he and Mom had an auto parts store, then he did radio work, and I tagged along with him, and we'd go to the tracks he drove to, whether it was Atlanta or Bristol or Rockingham or Martinsville or whatnot. And I just always loved the sport and loved the people. Couldn't make a living at it in radio back then, but I just grew up around the sport from the time that I was 6 years old and just always loved it and wanted to do it more part-time. So I evolved that way because I had a great career at Duke Power. But from the first race I went to, I just loved the sport and got to know the people and just wanted to stay around it.
The community a better place having you as the executive director of the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Thank you so much for spending time with us, with Winston Kelley.
It has been my pleasure. It has been an honor to see you, to be a part of this program, and appreciate all that you have done and continue to do. And glad that you're not fully retired either.
There you go. I appreciate that very much. Well, that's all the time we have for Mayhack Sports, the Delano Little Show. We hope to see you next time.